My name is Francesca Sinclair. I'm 36 years old and I price risk for a living. On a Friday evening in July, I stood on my parents' porch in New Rochelle holding a box of apple hand pies, believing my mom finally wanted to apologize to me. Then I looked through the dining room window and saw three men in suits sitting beside my sister, legal documents fanned out around my mother's pot roast like place settings. What my sister said when I sat down at that table was ugly. What my husband slid across it 10 minutes later ended the whole performance, and by the time the ice melted in the tea pitcher, two of those lawyers couldn't get to their cars fast enough. But that night only makes sense if you start 4 months earlier, with a cream-colored envelope and an invoice for $45,000 with my name on it. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light and quiet people finally speak. If you've ever been treated like the family bank instead of the family, this story is for you. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight, and be sure to subscribe, because you will want to hear how this dinner ended. 4 months earlier it was March, and my life looked simple from the outside. I worked as a senior risk analyst at a reinsurance firm in Midtown Manhattan, 13 years in, corner cubicle with a view of a parking structure. My job is reading disasters on paper before they happen in the world. Floods, fires, lawsuits, fraud. You learn a certain calm doing that work. Numbers don't scream at you. They just sit there being true. I lived on the Upper West Side with my husband Nathan Cole, 4 years married, no kids yet, one temperamental radiator. My family, 40 minutes north in New Rochelle, believed Nathan was a contracts guy at some firm downtown. That's all they ever asked. So that's all they ever knew, and I never corrected them. You'll understand why soon enough. What my family did know, in careful detail, was my salary range, my bonus schedule, and my habit of saying yes. When my parents' roof gave out 6 years ago, I wired $9,000 before the tarp was even tied down. When my little sister Tiana needed her last 2 years of college covered, I was 27 and 4 years into my career, and I paid it without being asked twice. When Grandma Ruth's affairs needed an executor, guess whose name was on the paperwork? In the Sinclair family, I had a job title long before Manhattan gave me one. I was the responsible one. I used to think that title was a compliment. It took an engagement ring, an invoice, and a dining room full of lawyers to teach me what it actually was, a billing address. And the first bill of the season arrived on the first Sunday in April, wearing a rented smile. Easter dinner at my parents' house is a 40-minute drive and a 30-year time warp. Same floral wallpaper, same china cabinet full of Grandma Ruth's dishes nobody is allowed to touch. Tiana stood up before the ham was carved and held out her left hand. The ring was a whisper of a diamond in a very loud setting. Her fiancé stood beside her with his hand on her shoulder, like a senator posing for a portrait. Chase Merritt, 34. Founder of Merritt Ventures. He said, founder, the way other men say, doctor. He told us he'd already exited 2 companies, that the second exit basically funded itself, and that he and Tiana met at a conference where he was, sort of the keynote. I watched his watch while he talked. It was a beautiful watch. It was also on a strap so worn it didn't match the story, the way a rental tux never quite fits at the shoulders. His timeline had a gap in it too. 2 companies, 2 exits, and yet the math of his years didn't leave room for both. Nobody else at the table was doing that math. That's the occupational hazard of my job. The little machine in my head ticks whether I ask it to or not. My mom was glowing in a way I hadn't seen since Tiana's pageant years. She raised her glass and said, "Finally, this family will have a wedding worth talking about." Then she said the budget would be handled by the family, and when she said the word family, she wasn't looking at the couple. She was looking straight down the table at me, the way you look at an account balance. 3 weeks later, I found out exactly what that look cost. The bridal brunch was at a restaurant in New Rochelle with cloth napkins and valet parking, which should have been my first clue, since nobody in my family valets. 12 women, mimosa flutes, Tiana at the head of the table wearing a sash that said, "Future Mrs. Merritt." I found my seat and there it was, propped against my water glass like a wedding favor, a cream-colored envelope with my name in my mother's handwriting. Francesca. Not Fran. The formal version, the one she used on report cards and reprimands. Inside was a single typed page with a header that read, in bold, family contribution. Below it, itemized like a closing statement. Venue, 19,500. Dress and alterations, 5,800. Photography and videography, 7,200. Florals, 4,300. Band, 5,400. Rehearsal dinner, 2,800. Total, $45,000. Due, it said, upon acceptance. I read it twice because in my job you always read it twice, and the second read is where the ugly lives. There was no question mark anywhere on that page. It wasn't a request. It was an invoice, formatted by someone who had watched me pay every other bill this family ever generated and had no reason to believe this one would be different. I looked up. 11 faces were pointed at me, forks down, and the table had gone quiet the way a courtroom goes quiet. My mom's expression was serene. Tiana lifted her mimosa, smiled at me over the rim, and said, "To family stepping up." 11 glasses went up around me. Mine stayed on the table, and the temperature of that entire restaurant dropped about 10 degrees, while everybody waited to see if I'd reach for it. I set the invoice face down next to my plate and kept my voice at the register I use for board presentations. Calm, unhurried. "I love you, T," I said, "and I'm not paying this." You could hear the espresso machine hiss 2 rooms away. I offered what I'd actually budgeted in my head on the drive down, because I had, of course, run numbers on the drive down. "I'd be honored to buy your dress. The whole thing, the alterations, the veil. That's my gift." A dress is a gift. $45,000 is a mortgage payment plan on someone else's fantasy. My mother's face did something I've only ever seen on flip phones, a whole screen changing in one motion. The hostess' smile shut off. What replaced it was flat and administrative, the face of a loan officer denying an application. "Sit down, Francesca," she said, though I was already sitting. "You seem confused about what this is. Nobody's asking." Then she folded her hands and said the sentence she'd been carrying her whole life, the family motto nobody ever stitched on a pillow. Family is a debt you're born into. Around the table, aunts nodded like a congregation. Tiana's voice came in high and hot. "You owe this family, Fran? You think we don't know what you make?" I put cash down for my untouched eggs, kissed the top of my sister's head, and walked to the car at a speed I'd call dignified. My hands only started shaking at the second red light, and it wasn't fear. It was recognition. I had just watched 20 years of my usefulness get repriced in real time. That night, my mom texted me one line: "Think carefully. Everything can be undone." I sat with that word for a long time. Undone. To be fair to the woman I was that spring, my yes reflex didn't come from nowhere. It was installed early, the way load-bearing walls are. I was 16 when my dad got laid off from the electrical contractor he'd given 19 years. I had a weekend job scooping ice cream, and one Sunday I put my whole paycheck, folded in a napkin, next to my mom's coffee cup. $81. She didn't thank me. She did something better. Or so it felt at the time. That afternoon, with my Aunt Denise sitting right there at the kitchen table, my mom said, "Francesca keeps this family running." I chased the feeling in that sentence for the next 20 years, the way some people chase a first high. Useful got me seen. Useful got me named. So I stayed useful. The roof, the tuition, the Christmas when I covered the property taxes and we all agreed to call it a gift. And 3 years ago, when Grandma Ruth passed, it was me the lawyer called, because Ruth had named me executor of her estate. Not my mom, her own daughter. Me. I spent 8 months on that estate. Every dish, every dollar, every filing, accounted for down to the penny, and when it closed 2 years ago, the Westchester County Surrogates Court approved the final accounting with a stamp I could probably draw from memory. Remember that stamp. I need you to remember that stamp, because months later, at a dinner table with 3 lawyers in the room, that boring piece of paper would be worth more than everything else I own. At the time, though, it was just one more job the responsible one did quietly. and the family was about to remind me what quiet workers get. The retaliation came dressed as concern, the way it always does in families like mine. Aunt Denise called first, syrup-voiced. "Sweetheart, weddings bring out stress in everyone. Your mother only wants what's fair." Fair. There's a word that it does a lot of unpaid labor in my family. Aunt Carol called next and skipped the syrup. "After everything that woman sacrificed for you, one check is too much?" By Wednesday, I'd been removed from the group chat called Sinclair Wedding Squad. No announcement. I just noticed one day the thread had gone still, the way you notice a clock stopped ticking. Then came the Instagram era of the conflict. Tiana posted a sunset with a caption that read, "Some people show their true colors when it matters most. Choosing joy anyway." 200 likes. Aunts I hadn't heard from since Grandma Ruth's funeral suddenly commenting hearts and prayer hands. My cousin Melissa, Denise's daughter and the only relative under 40 who calls me by my actual name, texted me privately. "What did you do? Mom says you refused to help with the wedding at all." That's the sentence that told me the story had already been drafted, edited, and distributed. In the family's version, I hadn't offered the dress. In the family's version, there was no invoice, no due upon acceptance, no toast to my wallet. There was only a rich sister in Manhattan who had turned her back. Public opinion inside a family works exactly like a jury pool that's already been poisoned. You can't argue with it. You can only watch it convict you. I put my phone face down and told myself it would burn out by summer. Then, on a Tuesday, my dad called, and his voice had a crack in it. "Can I come see you?" he said. Alone. Before my dad could get on a train, Chase beat him to me. I came down to my office lobby on a Thursday, and there he was, posed by the security desk in a blazer the color of a boarding pass, telling the guard a story that had the guard laughing. Charm is a skill. I've audited enough charming men's balance sheets to know it's usually a cost center. "Franny," he said, arms wide. "Nobody calls me Franny. I was in the neighborhood. Walk with me?" We didn't walk. I stood exactly where the cameras were. He got to the pitch fast, I'll give him that. "Look, this wedding stuff, it's beneath all of us. Forget contributing. What if you invested instead? Same 45 grand but into Merit Ventures. You'd be getting equity. Friends and family round. Very exclusive. This thing is about to go vertical." He said, "Go vertical," with a hand motion, like a man describing an airplane to a child. I asked him what the company actually sold. He said solutions, and then a sentence with the words ecosystem, scalable, and pre-revenue in it, which in my professional experience is 3 synonyms for broke. Then he leaned in, lowered his voice into the register menus when they think they're being irresistible, and said, "Come on. What was that bonus of yours last year? Like 41, 42? You won't even feel this." The lobby got very cold. My bonus number wasn't on LinkedIn. It wasn't anywhere. I asked him how he'd know a thing like that, and he smiled with all the top teeth and said, "Family talks." That night, I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and said out loud to nobody, "I do this for a living. Time to do it for myself." Here's something people don't realize about men like Chase. You don't need to hack anything to see their skeletons. The bones are filed with the state, alphabetized, and cost about $11 to look at. I started where I always start, with the company. Merit Ventures LLC, registered 4 years ago, a virtual office address in a building that rents mailboxes by the month. No trademarks, no permits, no press that wasn't self-published. A website with stock photos of an office that, reverse image searched, turned out to be a co-working space in Denmark. Fine. Plenty of small companies are thin on paper. So I went backwards through the corporate registries, state by state, and that's where the pattern stood up and introduced itself. Before Merit Ventures, there was Merit Capital Group, formed in Florida, administratively dissolved after 2 years. Before that, Meridian Merit Partners, formed in New Jersey, dissolved. Same registered agent style, same mailbox addresses, same arc. Open, raise money from people who trust you, go quiet, dissolve, move 1 state north. In my office, we have a name for that shape on a chart. We call it a sawtooth. And a sawtooth on a personal balance sheet means the same thing it means on a failing company's. Somebody is feeding the front of the machine to keep the back from being seen. It was almost midnight when I found the detail that made me sit back from the screen. The Florida filings weren't under Chase Merritt. They were signed by a managing member named Charles B. Merritt. Same birthday month buried in a notary line. Same man, different first name, one state and one identity ago. My sister wasn't marrying a founder. She was marrying a franchise, and I hadn't even gotten to the courthouses yet. My dad came down to the city on a Saturday, which for Gerald Sinclair is an act of courage on par with skydiving. He's 66, a retired electrician, a man who thinks Manhattan is a fine place that should be experienced through a windshield with the doors locked. He sat at my kitchen table with his tea and his good flannel and got where he was going the slow way, through the Mets, the weather, and the state of my radiator. Then he set the mug down. Just do it, Franny, for peace. Your mother is complicated, but she's your mother. I watched his hands while he said it. Electrician's hands, scarred at the knuckles, folded like he was in church. My whole childhood those hands fixed everything in that house except the thing that actually needed rewiring. I asked him the question I'd been carrying since the brunch, and I asked it gently, because I love this man. Dad, when was the last time peace in that house wasn't paid for by me? He looked into his tea like the answer might be printed on the bottom of the mug. He was quiet long enough for the refrigerator to cycle twice. That silence was the most honest thing anyone in my family had said to me in months. When he finally spoke, it wasn't an answer. It was a beginning. There's something with the house, he said, and then he stopped himself, the way a man stops at the edge of wet concrete. Never mind, it's handled. He hugged me at the door, harder than usual, and left me standing in my own hallway doing my actual job after hours, staring at a sentence full of missing information and pricing what it would cost me later. The court records took a weekend and cost me less than dinner. What they told me was worth more than my degree. Charles B. Merritt had a civil judgment in Florida from a few years back, $84,000, entered after he stopped showing up to his own hearings. There was a second judgment in New Jersey, $37,500, a supplier who'd fronted goods to a Merritt entity and gotten a dissolved shell for a thank you note, and filed against him personally, a federal tax lien, $28,900. I ran the total the way I'd run any counterparty exposure, and it came in north of $150,000. All of it live, all of it collecting interest, all of it invisible from the seat next to him at an Easter table. But the filing that kept me up wasn't a number. It was a pending civil fraud complaint in New Jersey, filed the previous year, still open. I pulled the complaint and read it standing up. The plaintiffs were a married couple in Bergen County. They alleged that the defendant had become engaged to their daughter, moved the relationship fast, and persuaded the family to advance funds toward a wedding and an investment in his company, funds that were never seen again after the engagement quietly ended. There was a draft agreement attached as an exhibit. The daughter's name was redacted. The pattern was not. I sat down slowly on my kitchen floor, which is not standard analyst procedure, and let it land. Tiana wasn't Chase's fiancée. She was his fiscal year. And somewhere in Bergen County there was a family who'd already paid full price for the exact show my family was now selling tickets to. Let me pause here and ask you something. Listener to listener, have you ever pulled the public records on someone your family swore was perfect? Tell me in the comments what you found, because I've learned I'm nowhere near the only one. And if you're new here, subscribe now, because what my mother did next is the reason this story exists at all. That Sunday night, I laid it all out on our kitchen table like a case file, because that's what it was. The dissolved shells, the two judgments, the lien, the Bergen County complaint with its redacted daughter. Nathan came home from the gym, saw the spread, and did the thing I married him for. He didn't say a word for 10 minutes. He sat down, read every page in order, squared the corners of the stack, and looked up with the expression he gets when a puzzle resolves into a picture he's seen before. "Fran," he said, Does your family actually know what I used to do for a living? I laughed, and it came out with edges on it. They never asked. And they never had. In 4 years of holidays, not one Sinclair had ever asked my husband a single question about his work beyond still doing contracts. Here's what one question would have gotten them. Before the firm, before the corner office in Manhattan, Nathan Cole spent 9 years as a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, financial fraud section. His entire career was men like Chase, except the ones he handled had better shells and worse endings. My family had spent 4 years seating one of the most dangerous fraud lawyers on the eastern seaboard at the kid's end of the table because he was quiet and drove a Honda. Nathan tapped the Bergen County complaint. "This one has a shape I don't like," he said. "It's not a broke boyfriend shape. It's a system." Then he asked me the question that reframed my whole summer. "Who introduced the invoice? Him or your mother?" I decided to try the gentlest version first because she's my sister, and because I remembered teaching her to ride a bike in the church parking lot, running behind her with my hand on the seat long after she thought I'd let go. We met at a coffee shop halfway, in Pelham. I brought exactly one document, the mildest one in the file, the Florida dissolution notice. No judgments, no lien, no lawsuit. Just a state record showing her fiancé's last company had been shut down by the government for ignoring its own paperwork. I slid it across the table the way you'd hand someone a sweater in the cold, and I said, "I'm not asking you to leave him. I'm asking you to ask him about this." Tiana looked at it for maybe 4 seconds. Then she looked at me, and I watched something close behind her eyes like a store gate at midnight. "You've been investigating him?" Her voice went up an octave and out into the room. "You couldn't just write the check like a normal sister. You had to run a background check on the man I love." I kept my voice level, told her it was one public document, that anyone could see it, that I'd found it in minutes. And that's when my little sister leaned back, crossed her arms, and said the quiet part with her whole chest. "Everyone has debts, Fran. At least he dreams big. Everyone has debts." She knew. Maybe not the full number, maybe not Bergen County, but she knew the water had a current, and she'd decided to swim anyway, because the fantasy on the other side was worth it. She stood up, dropped the paper in her purse like a napkin, and delivered the exit line. "Coffee's on you, you can afford it." There's a moment in my job when a counterparty stops being a relationship and becomes a file. It's never dramatic. Somebody just quietly changes how a name gets handled, and after that, everything about them is documented, dated, and kept. That night, at my kitchen table, I did it to my own family. I took down one of the slate gray folders I use at work for the accounts we flag highest risk, and I wrote across the tab in block letters, "Project Chapel." Inside went the corporate filings, the judgments, the lien, the Bergen County complaint, printed clean with a table of contents, because if my hands were going to shake, I'd rather they shake over something organized. Then I added the pages nobody would expect in a file about a wedding, my own executor records, the final accounting from Grandma Ruth's estate, the receipts, the court approval with the Westchester stamp. Nathan watched me punch holes and asked why the estate papers were going in. I told him the truth I'd been circling for weeks. In my job, you don't wait for the flood to buy sandbags. If this family decides to come for me, I already know which direction the water's from. He nodded slowly, left the room, and came back with a plain white envelope, sealed, my name on the front, in his careful lawyer print. He put it in the back of the folder without a word of explanation. "Just in case," he said. "Don't open it unless we need it." I asked what was in it. He kissed my forehead and said, "A door. Hopefully we never walk through it." From that night on, my family was a file on my desk. That's what they'd turned themselves into. And files, unlike families, don't get the benefit of the doubt. They get verified. The first sign that my mother was building something came, as always, through Aunt Denise, who has never in her life delivered her own opinion, only Lorraine's, franchised. She called me on a weeknight with her voice arranged into a casserole of concern. "Sweetheart, I want you to know I don't believe a word of it." A classic opening. You can't defend yourself against a charge nobody's stated, so I waited. "It's just, Your mother mentioned there were some irregularities with Mama Ruth's estate. Money that maybe didn't go where it should have. She's worried about you, that's all. She says, handling all those accounts alone. No oversight. Anyone could make mistakes. I stood very still in my kitchen and felt the whole architecture of it assemble in front of me, girder by girder. My mother wasn't gossiping. Gossip is aimless. This had a load-bearing structure. Step 1. Seed the family with a doubt shaped exactly like my greatest strength, so that the responsible one becomes the suspicious one. Step 2 didn't exist yet, but I could already feel the bolt holes waiting for it. You don't draft a story like that for entertainment. You draft it because you might need it. The way Chase kept mailbox addresses in 3 states. Melissa texted me an hour later. Why is everyone suddenly talking about Grandma's money? Mom's been on the phone all night. I looked across the counter at the slate gray folder, at the court stamp writing quietly inside it, and I understood something that made me colder than the accusation itself. I had put those estate papers in the file on an instinct, 3 days before the Whisper campaign started. My instincts don't usually beat my mother off the line, which meant this plan was older than my refusal. My dad called at 10 on a Tuesday night, and Gerald Sinclair does not call at 10 on a Tuesday night. His voice was low, the way it gets when my mother is 1 room away. I need to tell you something, and I need you to not do anything about it yet. I sat down. Your mother put a deposit on the venue, that estate on the Sound that Tiana liked. $12,000 to hold the date. I asked the only question that mattered. With what money? The pause on the line had furniture in it. She took a draw. On the house. The house. The 3-bedroom colonial they'd owned outright since I helped clear the last of the mortgage. My mother had opened a home equity line and handed $12,000 of her own roof to a caterer's calendar for a wedding nobody could pay for, thrown in honor of a man whose last 2 companies were dissolved by 2 different states. She says it's fine, my dad went on, hating every word he was carrying. She says Chase will reimburse us after the merger closes. I closed my eyes. There is no merger. There was never going to be a merger. Merger is a word men like Chase keep in the same drawer as ecosystem and vertical. Words that sound like the future and cost like the past. I heard my father breathing on the line, and behind that, faintly, a television. And behind that, a house I grew up in, now wired directly into a con man's cash flow. Dad, I said, mail me the paperwork. I just want to read the terms. He did. And folded inside the statements, jammed in like a bookmark he'd grabbed without looking, came something that stopped me cold. It was a notebook, spiral-bound, flowered cover gone soft as cloth, the kind drugstores sold 50 years ago. My dad, sweeping loose papers into the envelope with the loan statements, had scooped it up off my mother's desk without noticing. I almost mailed it back unopened. Almost. On the first page, in a bubbly teenage cursive I'd never seen but recognized anyway, the way you recognize a voice through a wall, was written, Lorraine, private. And on the next page a column of entries that rearranged my whole understanding of the woman who raised me. Ode to Mother. Room and board. September. $12. Dress for chorus recital. $4. Bus fare. Owed back double per mother. Interest for late payment. $1. Page after page, month after month, a 15-year-old girl keeping honest books on her own childhood, itemizing what it costs to be somebody's daughter. Some entries had check marks. Paid. Some had my grandmother's own handwriting slashed across them, spiky and cold, correcting the arithmetic upward. And at the bottom of one page in that same adult hand, underlined twice, a sentence my grandmother apparently thought a teenage girl needed to memorize. Love is what you can show the neighbors. I sat in my parked car outside my building for a long time with that notebook on the steering wheel. My mother didn't invent the ledger. She inherited it, the way other families hand down christening gowns. She'd spent 40 years making payments on a debt her own mother wrote, and when her balance never zeroed out, she opened an account in my name. That should have made it hurt less. It didn't. Because here's what I know from 13 years of pricing damage. Understanding where the flood came from doesn't dry out a single room of your house. 2 days later, the letter arrived. It came to our apartment in a heavy envelope, the kind of paper that's trying to bill you just for touching it. Letterhead. Pierce and Associates, attorneys at law, with a Yonkers address. The letter itself was 3 paragraphs of fog. My family, it said, wished to formalize certain familial financial understandings. It referenced long-standing patterns of support and a mutually beneficial arrangement, and invited me to review the enclosed draft in a spirit of reconciliation. The enclosed draft was titled Family Support and Loan Agreement, and I want you to hear what was actually in it, because I've read predatory term sheets for a living, and this one had all the classics wearing a corsage. Item 1. I would provide $45,000, described as a loan, with no interest rate, no repayment schedule, and no repayment obligation, while family harmony persists. A loan you never have to repay is called a gift everywhere, except in documents written by people planning to come back for more. Item 2. And read this one slowly like I did. I would agree to serve as co-signer on a business line of credit for Merit Ventures LLC, in support of family enterprise. Co-signer, meaning when Chase's company did what all 3 of his companies do, the bank would come to my address. Item 3. A mutual non-disparagement clause, under which I would agree not to make harmful statements about any family member or affiliated business. They wanted my money, my credit, and my silence, in that order. Notarized. I read it at the kitchen counter and felt strangely professional about it, the way you do when a threat finally files paperwork. Nathan read it behind me. He got to the signature block where the attorney's name was printed, and I felt him go still in a way I'd never felt in 4 years of marriage. Alden Pierce, he said. I know that name. Nathan didn't explain right away. He went to his study, and I heard drawers, and when he came back he had the look of a man paging through an old case in his head. Years ago, when I was with the U.S. Attorney's Office, we had a matter where a witness suddenly showed up with a signed statement recanting everything. Signed in a lawyer's office, one sitting, no chance to review, family members in the room applying the pressure. The lawyer who staged that little signing ceremony was Alden Pierce. He said the State Bar had eventually caught up with Pierce on a different matter with the same signature move, documents signed under pressure, clients steamrolled. Pierce was suspended from practice for 18 months. Then, the way it goes more often than anyone wants to know, he was reinstated, and he hung his shingle back up in Yonkers, a one-man shop with a rented conference room. I did my part of the homework, because trust in our house is a 2-analyst system. The Public Attorney Registry confirmed it. License suspended, license restored, currently registered, solo practice. No associates listed. Hold that detail. A firm calling itself Pierce and Associates, with no associates anywhere on file. Then I did the thing that broke the case open, and it took 4 minutes and a search bar. Chase's social media, 3 years of golf photos and boat photos and men pointing at each other across restaurant tables. And there, in an anniversary post from his college fraternity chapter, arm around Chase's shoulders, wearing 20 extra pounds and the same smile, was Alden Pierce. Fraternity brothers. My family hadn't hired a lawyer to formalize their shakedown. Chase had supplied one from his own bench, the way he supplied the merger and the exits and the keynote. The whole thing was catered. So when the phone rang that Sunday and it was my father's number, I already knew what season we were in. Except my dad's voice wasn't the voice of a man baiting a trap. That's what made it dangerous. Franny. Warm. He hadn't called me Franny since I was 12, back when he'd take me on service calls and let me hold the voltage tester like it was a scepter. Your mother wants to apologize. I didn't say anything, so he kept going, and I could hear how carefully he'd rehearsed. No lawyers, no wedding talk, just dinner, Friday. Casual. She's been doing a lot of thinking, honey. We both have. Please. Here's the thing I need you to understand, because it's the part I'd want to skip if I were telling this story about somebody else. I knew. Not the details, but the odds. I'd seen the letter from Pierce. I'd read the draft agreement. I build probability models before 9 a.m. most days, and the model on this dinner was not ambiguous. I hung up and sat across from Nathan and said it out loud like a briefing. You know what this might be. He nodded, and being Nathan, he didn't tell me not to go. He asked what I wanted to do, and I heard myself say the truest sentence of that whole year. I know exactly what it might be, and I'm still going. If there's a 5% chance my mother actually means it, I've paid more for worse odds. That's the part of this story the file can't hold, the entry that never makes it into any risk model. Hope is a position you keep paying to hold. I'd been averaging into it for 20 years, and I could not make myself close it out over the phone. But I'm also my mother's daughter in one specific way. I don't walk into rooms unprepared. If Friday was an apology, wonderful. If Friday was something else, then Friday was going to meet the version of me that gets brought in when the numbers don't add up. We spent the weekend before that dinner the way other couples spend a weekend before a vacation, with lists and logistics and a shared calendar. Except our itinerary was a contingency plan. I took Project Chapel to the copy shop on Amsterdam and made 3 complete sets, tabbed and bound, because documents you might have to hand across a table should never exist in single copies. Nathan reviewed the Bergen County complaint again and flagged the exhibit, that draft agreement the other family had attached, and set it side by side with the one Pierce had mailed me. He didn't say anything when he did it. He just laid them next to each other on the desk and let me look. And I'm telling you, the paragraphs rhymed. Tuesday I took a long lunch and drove up to the Westchester County Courthouse, where a clerk with reading glasses on a beaded chain pulled the file on Grandma Ruth's estate and stamped me 2 certified copies of the final accounting. Certified. Raised seal. The kind of boring that wins wars. Wednesday, Nathan came home and told me he'd cleared his Friday afternoon. I asked him if he was sure because walking into my mother's dining room was not billable. He straightened an imaginary tie and said, "Wouldn't miss it. I'm coming as your +1. Contracts guy." It was the only time either of us laughed that week. The sealed white envelope rode along untouched, though Nathan, I later learned, had quietly replaced what was inside it the night Pierce's letter arrived. I'd catch myself looking at it, sitting in the back of the folder behind the tabs, my name on it in his print, and I never opened it. Some part of me had decided that opening it would mean admitting where this was headed, and some other part of me, the part that still smelled like that apple orchard we used to visit every October, kept whispering that maybe none of it would be needed. Maybe it really was pot roast and an apology. Thursday night I stood at our kitchen table with my hand flat on the folder, and I want to mark this moment honestly, because it's the hinge the whole story turns on, quieter than anything that happened at the dinner itself. In my job, once you open a file on a counterparty, something permanent happens. It doesn't matter if the audit comes back clean. You never see that name the same way again, because you've already imagined every way they could hurt you, and imagination like that doesn't have a reverse gear. I had opened a file on my own mother, tabbed it, certified it, made copies. Whatever happened on Friday, whether the table held pot roast or paperwork, the daughter who had never done that, the one who wired money before the tarp was tied down, she wasn't coming back. I knew it standing there, the way you know a season has changed before you've checked a forecast. Nathan came in and found me like that, hand on the folder like it was a Bible I couldn't swear on. I gave him the one rule I had left, my last offer to the 5%. If it's really an apology, the folder stays in the car. He said, "Deal," and meant it, and loaded the folder into his briefcase anyway, because a deal and a plan are 2 different documents. Friday evening we drove north out of the city with a box of apple hand pies from the bakery my dad loves on the passenger seat floor. 40 minutes, the same drive as always, the sound flashing between houses as we came into New Rochelle. We turned onto my parents' street at 6:55. The porch light was on. I need you to understand what that meant in the grammar of my mother's house. My mother only turns the porch light on for guests. I grew up in that house, and the light was on for me. Which brings us back to where I started, on that porch with a bakery box, looking through the dining room window at three men in suits. Time does a strange thing when a forecast verifies. Half of you drops through the floor, and the other half gets very, very organized. I counted the room through the glass like a manifest. My mother at the head in her company pearls. My sister with wedding binder posture. Chase in the boarding pass blazer. A heavy-set man in his 50s commanding the far side of the table with documents squared in front of him. And two more suits flanking him, a woman with a legal pad and a younger guy whose jacket fit like he'd borrowed it from a bigger salesman. The pot roast sat in the middle of all that paper. Steaming, domestic, obscene, a stage prop hired to say the word family while the document said everything else. Nathan's hand rested flat on my back. "Folders in the car," he said quietly. "Say the word and it stays there." I rang my own parents' doorbell for the first time in my life. My mother answered wearing the hostess smile, kissed the air near my cheek, and said, "You brought pies. How sweet," in the exact voice she uses on neighbors she's about to outdo. Inside, the heavy-set man rose with his hand out. "Alden Pierce, the family's counsel. And my associates, Ms. Whitfield, Mr. Calloway." The woman nodded over her legal pad. Calloway nodded too, and didn't offer a hand, and I clocked that. At every place setting except mine and Nathan's, dinner. At mine, a document, thick as a menu, with little yellow tabs marching down the side like caution tape. Sign here, sign here, sign here. And peeking out from under the agreement, a schedule sheet titled Financial Capacity of Contributing Party, with numbers on it. My numbers, my salary band, my bonus. Close enough to true that I heard Chase's voice in my head, smiling with all the top teeth. Family talks. Pierce clicked his pen and smiled at the room like a man opening a show. "Shall we begin?" What followed was a piece of theater I've since come to admire, in the way you can admire a well-built trap with your foot half in it. Pierce read the agreement aloud in a notarial drone designed to make surrender sound like paperwork. The $45,000 became a familial support instrument. The co-signature on Chase's credit line became a gesture of confidence in family enterprise. The gag clause became mutual respect, memorialized. My mother provided the score, murmuring at intervals. This just makes official what family already means. My dad studied his plate like a man reading his own obituary in it, and I did my job. I asked questions in my meeting voice, one at a time, and watched the machine grind. Who is the beneficiary on the line of credit, and at what limit? Pierce said the limit was to be determined by the lending institution, which means unlimited by anyone at this table. What are the repayment terms on this loan? Flexible, in the family spirit, meaning none. Why does a family reconciliation require me to waive my right to say true things about Merit Ventures? Silence, then Chase, smooth as shelf paper. Standard stuff, Franny, protects everybody. I set the pen down on the table, squared it parallel to the document the way Pierce had squared his files, and said, "No. Flat. Room temperature." And my sister came up out of her chair like a flare. "Sign this, or I'll ruin you." The room held still. Even Pierce blinked. Tiana leaned across the pot roast, mascara already going, voice shaking with something she'd been rehearsing in a mirror. "I'll call your company Monday. I'll tell them what you did with Grandma Ruth's money, how it all went through your hands, how nobody ever checked. Compliance departments love a family whistleblower, Fran. Who do you think they'll believe? You, or a crying little sister with nothing to gain? Put yourself in that chair for 1 second. Your own sister, 3 strangers in suits. One signature between you and their version of peace. What would you have done? Tell me below and subscribe, because the next 10 minutes are why I'm telling this story at all. I folded my napkin, placed it beside the pen, and said, "Before anyone signs anything, meet my husband." Nathan set down his tea with the small, precise click of a man who has been waiting politely for the meeting to reach his agenda item. He didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. He reached into the briefcase beside his chair, and while he did, he introduced himself to my family for the first time in 4 years. Nathan Cole, until 5 years ago, Assistant United States Attorney, Southern District of New York. Financial fraud section, 9 years. These days I'm a partner at a firm in Manhattan. White-collar defense. Which means, Mr. Pierce, that I've sat across tables like this one more times than either of us can count. Usually, there's better coffee. I watched the sentence travel around that dining room like weather. My mother's hostess smile stayed up but stopped reaching anything. Chase's jaw did a small readjustment, the kind you see on men recalculating an exit. And Pierce, who had been performing boredom over his legal pad, went carefully, completely still. The stillness of a man who has just recognized a species. Nathan slid the first document out of the case and placed it in front of Tiana, gently, like a menu. Before you call anyone Monday, you should know what you'd be reporting. That's a certified copy of the final accounting for Ruth Sinclair's estate. Filed, audited, and approved by the Westchester County Surrogates Court 2 years ago. Raised seal, bottom corner. Every dollar your grandmother had, traced to the penny, signed off by a judge. It's a public record. Anyone can order one. We ordered 2. He let that sit exactly 1 breath. Which brings me to the second thing. What your sister just heard, in front of a room full of witnesses, was a threat to fabricate a criminal accusation to force a money transfer. In this state, that has a name. Several, actually. I'm going to assume it was a young woman saying something desperate she already regrets, and we're all going to leave it in this room. Once. The gentleness of it was the terrifying part. And I watched my sister understand, in real time and in total silence, that the gun she'd been waving all summer had been pointing backwards the entire time. Pierce cleared his throat and reached for his files. Nathan said, "Not yet, counselor. You'll want to see the rest." The second set of documents came out bound and tabbed, and Nathan laid it in the middle of the table where the serving spoon should have gone. Public records on Merit Ventures LLC and its predecessors, compiled by my wife, who does this professionally and, frankly, better than my old office did. Page 1, the corporate sawtooth, Meridian Merit Partners, New Jersey, dissolved. Merit Capital Group, Florida, dissolved. Page 2, the Florida judgment, $84,000, the New Jersey judgment, $37,500, the federal tax lien, $28,900. North of $150,000 in live obligations? Nathan said mildly, which the gentleman asking you all to bankroll a $45,000 wedding has perhaps not mentioned. Page 4 is the name he filed under in Florida. Charles B. Merritt. Page 5 is a pending civil fraud suit in Bergen County. The plaintiffs are the parents of his previous fiancée. Their draft agreement is attached. You'll notice it rhymes with the one on this table. Paper went around that dining room hand to hand like a collection plate in reverse. My mother read page 2 with her lips pressed white. Tiana wasn't reading anymore. She was staring at Chase, who had begun a sentence with "I can explain the Florida thing," and discovered mid-sentence that no one, not even Pierce, was going to lay track in front of that train. And then Nathan took out the sealed white envelope, my name in his print, and opened it himself. And I finally learned what he'd been keeping in the back of our folder. A single page from the state's public attorney registry, printed and dated. Last item, and then we'll let you get back to dinner. Pierce and Associates. I looked for the Associates, Mr. Pierce. The registry shows 1 licensed attorney at your address. You, Ms. Whitfield, is a paralegal, unlicensed. Mr. Calloway isn't in the legal directory at all, though he does appear in the corporate filings. As a managing member of Merit Ventures. Calloway's chair scraped. Nathan continued, all courtesy. Staging a pressured signing with non-lawyers presented as counsel, given your disciplinary history, with your suspension on file. 1 phone call to the grievance committee ends your license for good, and you know it better than I do. The exodus took under 3 minutes. Pierce swept his papers faster than he'd dealt them, mumbled about a conflict of interest, and was gone with his associates before the storm door stopped shivering. Chase said, "Tiana, baby, this is all context," to a room that had none left for him, and followed. Engines started outside. 1, 2. And my mother straightened her napkin and did not move. Her real offer came without any lawyers at all. The house went quiet the way a stage goes quiet after the extras leave, and it was just the five of us and a cold pot roast. The Sinclairs. Party of four. Plus the man they'd finally met. My mother folded her hands on the table, and when she spoke, her voice was lower and truer than I'd heard it in a decade, and that made it worse, because this was the voice under all the other voices, the one the ledger wrote. Fine. No papers. Forget the papers. They were Chase's idea, that's obvious now, and he'll answer for it. A breath. But hear me, Francesca. Your sister's wedding is bleeding, this family's name is bleeding, and there is one person at this table who can stop it quietly. Write the check. For her. For us. Do that. And tonight never happened. Refuse, and don't come back to this house. Family is a debt you're born into. There it was. The motto. Laid on the table at last as what it had always been. Not wisdom. A toll booth. And then the harder hit. The one with no strategy in it at all. My baby sister. Mascara gone. Fantasy gone. Lawyer gone. Fiancé's engine still fading down the block, looking at me across the ruins of her own party and saying, barely above a whisper, "Just help me. Please." A courtroom I could handle. That nearly took my knees. Here is what I did, and I want you to hear that my hands were steady, because they were, and it cost me everything they had left. I took the slate gray folder from Nathan's case, Project Chapel in my own block letters, and I slid it across the table until it touched my sister's fingertips. The wedding was never the price, T. The fantasy was. The truth is free. It's all in there. Every page. And it's yours now. Read it. Then decide who ruins who. Then I turned to my mother and I gave her my answer with all the calm of 13 years of pricing catastrophe. I've paid every invoice this family ever sent me, Mom. The roof, the tuition, the taxes we called a gift. This is the first one I'm returning. She started to speak, and I finished first. One sentence. The one I'd been paying interest on since I was 16. I was born, Mom. That was never a debt. On the porch, in the yellow light she keeps for guests, Nathan took out his phone, thumb already moving toward the grievance committee's after-hours line, toward every hammer we now legally, righteously held. I put my hand over the screen. No letter, no charges, we're not collecting. He searched my face for a second, then put it away. Then what are we doing? He asked. Closing the account, I said. And we walked down my mother's steps into the July dark, and nobody called my name. And I want to be honest with you about what that silence weighed. You don't walk out of a room like that lighter. You walk out real. We were almost to the car when the storm door creaked, and my dad came down the walk in his socks, carrying the bakery box. The pies. Unopened, tape unbroken, held out in both hands like something he was returning to a store. She won't touch them, he said, apologizing with his whole body. And I couldn't watch them sit there. That's my father in a single image, a good man ferrying pastries between two women at war, fixing the one thing in the house he had the wiring diagram for. He stood there in the porch light spill, and then he said it. The thing he'd been carrying longer than any of us. She doesn't know another way, Franny. Her mother, God rest her, that woman kept books on everything. On birthdays, on forgiveness. Lorraine grew up thinking love had a balance due. Go easy on her. And the last piece clicked into place for me, not with anger, with a kind of terrible bookkeeping clarity. I told him the truth as gently as I owned it. I know, Dad. I found the notebook. I read it twice. His face did something complicated in the yellow light. Then you know she paid too, he said. Her whole life. I looked back at the house, at the dining room window where the pot roast was cooling among the abandoned place settings of a failed closing, and I said the sentence that I understand now was the actual end of my old life. More than the folder. More than the refusal. Somebody in this family had to be the last person to pay on that ledger, Dad. It might as well be me. He didn't argue. He hugged me, pies and all, crushed the corner of the box and didn't notice, and for the first time in my life my father let me leave that house without asking me to smooth anything over on the way out. That was his gift. It was the only currency he had, and he gave it. We drove south with the windows cracked, the sound smelling like salt and cut grass. The city skyline rising over the parkway like a spreadsheet full of light, and Nathan's hand found mine on the console and stayed. 6 weeks is what it took for the dust to show where everything had landed. The wedding was postponed indefinitely, which is wedding industry language for never. Tiana read the folder. I know because she did the one thing I never asked her to do. She called the family in Bergen County herself, and a mother she'd never met talked to her for 2 hours about a charming man, a fast engagement, and money that evaporated. And somewhere in that phone call, my sister heard her own story told in a stranger's voice, which is sometimes the only way any of us can hear it. She didn't call me. What I got, on a Tuesday in September, was a text from a number I didn't recognize. He had a storage unit in Jersey full of Merit Ventures boxes. You were right. I'm not ready to say more. Thank you. I didn't write back anything wise. I wrote, I'm here. No invoice. She sent back a heart. And that's where it rests. A door left open 1 inch, which is more than some sisters ever get. The venue, it turned out, had a 90-day cancellation clause. And here is the sentence I never budgeted for. My father handled it. Gerald Sinclair put on his funeral suit, drove to that estate on the Sound, and negotiated back most of the $12,000 deposit himself, then quietly set up payments out of his pension to retire the rest of the equity draw. First mess in 40 years of marriage he ever cleaned up alone. When he told me on the phone, he sounded 10 years younger. My mother has not spoken to me since July. The birthday card I mailed her came back unopened, returned to sender in her upright bank teller hand, and Aunt Denise made sure the family knows the official version, which is that I humiliated a grieving bride and turned my back on my own blood. The neighbors, I'm told, got the story with dessert. The ledger survives. Some machines you don't get to unplug. You only get to unplug yourself. Chase resurfaced in Charlotte within a month. New LLC, new website, new smiling photos. A new woman wearing a whisper of a diamond in a very loud setting. Nathan checks the dockets now and then. The Bergen County suit is still crawling forward, and when it lands, the paper trail my kitchen table built will be sitting right there in the public record waiting to be useful. We spent Thanksgiving in our apartment. Nathan carved. Melissa came, the only relative who ever asked me for my version before filing her verdict, and she brought her terrible ambrosia salad and we ate it anyway, and 2 of Nathan's colleagues with nowhere to go stayed until midnight laughing in my kitchen. Family, as it turns out, can be a thing you audit into existence. And that morning, before the turkey went in, I'd opened a savings account, the long kind, the someday kind, for a child who doesn't exist yet. The nickname field made me sit still for a minute. Then I typed it. Gift. Not a loan. I price risk for a living, and after 36 years inside my mother's economy, here is the only number that matters. Love that keeps a running balance isn't love, it's a loan, and you are allowed, at any age, no matter whose handwriting is on the invoice, to stop making payments on a debt you never signed for. That's my story. 1 invoice, 3 lawyers, and a quiet husband who only needed 1 envelope. If you've ever been treated like the family bank, hear me. The account is yours, and you're allowed to close it. If this story hit home, share it with someone who's still making payments. Drop a comment with your story, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.